Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Senior Vice President, Strategy, Pivotal, James Waters.
Morning, everybody. Thanks for being here in Austin. Tremendous room, exciting opportunity. And, I was thinking on the way here, why am I so excited to come to SpringOne every year? Like, what makes this special for me? Like, why is it this moment that I want to tweet about, welcome everybody to, send high fives? What's that essential thing about SpringOne that's so special? And, kind of what I came to is it's the one place where cloud-native developers are front and center. You travel a lot in the world, and you meet these enterprises that haven't quite figured out how to build software yet. They're, saddled with a lot of legacy. They think we could never build great software. We could never enable developers. We could never learn these new cloud-native patterns like Netflix and these web companies. But this is a really special room to me because it's the one place you can assemble a group of people who do and who believe in that model. And I think that's a lot of what I'll be sharing today and doing a little bit of MC, a little bit of vision and roadmap for us about where we're going. One thing that's really remarkable about SpringOne is the number of enterprises that are here speaking. So there's 2 slides here full of enterprise names. But the thing that I think they all have in common is that they've taken this unique and new approach to enterprise IT where they've really started to put developers first. And they've thought, if we can just give developers this amazing, low-friction path to production, what kind of human potential could we unleash? And I think that's really a special thing because there's all kind of security requirements, operational readiness, all of these extra burdens that enterprises carry. But the companies that come to SpringOne to present and share their stories have found a way to get developers to production in a secure, available, reliable way. And I think that confluence of developer enablement, security, and operational readiness is super unique to this conference, and I couldn't be more excited to hear more and more of these stories. I'm almost always excited to get off stage and just go listen to this. So what does that take? Just a little bit of review. Where are we in the market right now? Where are we as an industry? It kind of takes 2 things in my observation over my journey. It takes a set of new technologies, and it also takes a new philosophy. And I think the one rallying word we've all found to describe this paradigm shift we're going through that's putting developers first, making APIs front and center to our architecture, is cloud native. I think if you look at what Spring Boot has done to reduce the burden of getting a new API to production in enterprises, it's been unbelievable. I think Cloud Foundry has come to define the developer experience in the container era. Kubernetes has become the ubiquitous substrate for programmable infrastructure. And our friends over at Confluent and Kafka have started to define how developers get access to data and events to let them build a new set of rich applications. But there's also a philosophy behind all of this. And I think that philosophy starts with the idea that continuous delivery unleashes human potential. The idea that getting to prod versus getting to a meeting versus getting to a ticket is more important. And I think the other thing that's required in that era is a move around open source. The idea that these communities can interact with each other in real time, start with Git, and really build an ecosystem. So I think the open source ecosystem, along with this continuous delivery ethos, has really changed how we all do our jobs. But let me give you one really practical example. Like, what does that all mean? I think there's a new litmus test, which is that if you can't provide a developer experience in your product, it might not deserve to exist in your enterprise anymore. And I've encouraged a lot of the C-levels that I meet to start putting a litmus test of what's in and what's out. And there's a new era where if it isn't container-friendly, if it isn't dev-centric, if you can't put it through a CI/CD process, it's not testable. And I would say if it's not just another boot app to some level in enterprises, it might need to go. We put up with the world where a lot of sales-driven architectures have taken over enterprises, where there might be someone who sells integration software who wants to put everything that you're doing in their integration framework. But what we've found is that those things are not testable, they're not good for continuous delivery, and they're not developer-friendly. And I'll tell you one quick story. We were starting a project 3 or 4 years ago, And there was this one, project, and at the middle was this nice boot app that was great, but I looked all around it, and there was all of this integration software. And I said to the lead architect, I was like, you might have a challenge with that because you're going to be able to test and iterate on this central piece, but everything around it's going to be difficult. And he's like, yeah, we just got to get started. It was 1 year later, into my inbox, email. Yeah, all of that stuff that's not Spring Boot is slowing us down. So a lot of I didn't take too much pride in that, but a lot of what we're talking about today is how we're enabling developers in this cloud-native era because of lessons like that. The other great thing is that this is not just rah-rah. For enterprises now, there's a whole new set of data. And that data says that enabling developers to get to production in a continuous fashion actually changes all of these KPIs that you're looking for as businesses. So if you look at mean time to recovery, the DORA report from my friend Nicole Fosgren tells us that mean time to recovery goes down dramatically at enterprises that enable continuous delivery. So it used to be in the ITIL world, you had this force between change control and availability. Oh, we can't change because we need to drive availability and control. What the DORA science has now told everyone in your business is enable developers to go faster, and your mean time to recovery will be 7x better. So there really is science now behind all of this, and I think that's an exciting moment for us as a movement, is you've got technology, philosophy, and science all working in concert with each other. I think it's ushered in a whole new world of enterprise IT. I think the other thing about SpringOne, in addition to its developer focus, is it's very enterprise focused. We don't start with a 10-person startup and say, hey, that's success, all greenfield, win. We really confront a lot of the technologies that we all deal with on a day-to-day basis around our heritage applications. And if you look at how this paradigm shift to continuous delivery, it's changed everything from how we think of projects to products, of how we used to plan things in 600-page requirement documents, and now we have a more iterative approach. It used to be that everything was surrounded with ITIL, and now CI/CD is the word on the tongue of every CIO that I meet. And on a technology level, we've started to see technologies like event streaming replace a lot of the traditional way that we've managed data and data processing, and I'll talk a bit more about that. So, two big fronts in this change. One is cloud-native infrastructure. About to have a special guest tell us about big investments coming in the cloud-native infrastructure space, and also cloud-native app infrastructure. And I'm going to be welcoming up Cornelia Davis to talk a little bit about how we're regenerating everything that we do around Kubernetes in that era for cloud-native app infrastructure. One of our biggest partners in our journey to bring our platform technology to enterprises has been VMware. About 70% of all PCF workloads run on a VMware environment. And I couldn't be more excited to welcome to the stage a gentleman who's declared a definitive agreement to acquire Pivotal, Pat Gelsinger.
James, thank you. Great to be here.
It's so amazing to have you on stage here at SpringOne, Pat. Thank you.
Well, and I was so excited as, some of you might have seen, we announced our plan to acquire at VMworld.
Yeah.
And as part of that, we talked about the Spring community.
Yeah.
And I'll just tell you, I am blown away by the energy, the innovation. 75 million Spring Boot downloads every month. Wow. Right? To me, this is just off the charts. You guys, thank you so much. And we're just thrilled to bring this community and that energy into VMware Pivotal as we bring this together.
I think the Spring community couldn't be more excited about your sponsorship on that. A couple weeks ago, though, there's this technology announcement you made at VMworld. Big show, unbelievable response. Tanzu, can you tell us more about it?
Yeah, we're quite excited about Tanzu, and it really is bringing together everything that VMware is doing in this space. And what we see is that every organization has a strategic priority to build modern applications. And how do you bring those? How do you accelerate that? And we saw that there's this unique opportunity to bridge the world of developers and operators. And clearly, IT operations, that's sort of the VMware core customer base and partners. But being being able to bridge that in a seamless way into the developer community. Wow, operators, they want this consistent, rock-hard, secure infrastructure stuff. It's our job to make it work. Developers, they want access to modern constructs, tools, capabilities, microservices, APIs. And we see Kubernetes as the magic of bringing those two worlds together. And for that, we see Kubernetes, somewhat like the virtual machine or Java. If my name was Scott McNeely and and I was here 20 years ago, I'd be jumping up and down on stage and saying Java is it. And by the way, Scott is my neighbor, right, in California, but he lives down the hill from me, so I look down on Scott. Right, so he truly is down the hill, but his house is bigger than mine. So anyway, but just a little bit. But Kubernetes, this idea of being able to bridge those two worlds.
Yeah.
And not only do we see that opportunity, but it has achieved industry consensus.
Totally.
Right, and there's this momentum in the industry about this together, and that's what VMware Tanzu is all about: is bringing those two worlds together, bringing the energy together, and Pivotal and the Spring community play a critical role to make that successful.
I think as we're making this transition to a Kubernetes-centric world, it couldn't be more exciting to have your team's help on that. So what is it going to take, though, to really bring Kubernetes to every enterprise? How are you thinking about solving that challenge?
Yeah, well, we've broken it into these three buckets, and this is a picture that we showed at VMworld: the build, the run, and the manage bucket. And let's just walk around that super quickly. Build, obviously, this is you all. Right? And we have the Bitnami acquisition, but this is the core of what we see the Pivotal and the Spring community is bringing these world-class build capabilities. Then we're going to be able to manage them in a consistent way. And about a year ago, we acquired Heptio, and they're really in this multi-cloud management that you really could have one management plane that is being able to run all of your Kubernetes clusters and container environments, whether it's on public clouds, native like Azure and Amazon, or private cloud. That's where the Heptio team fits in. But the idea of run. And this was like, imagine you're going to a Beatles weekend, right? And they start playing Beatles favorites, right? And this was sort of like when we announced that we're putting Kubernetes directly into vSphere. It's like now we're playing Hey Jude on the Beatles weekend. Everybody in the vSphere, they're all going crazy. This is what we do for a living, is run infrastructure. And now we're going to be the leaders in running Kubernetes. That coming together is what PKS and what we're doing with Project Pacific.
Yes.
Putting Kubernetes right into the core of vSphere. So build, run, manage.
The excitement was palpable in the cloud-native community about that. I think it was a watershed moment when you realize this is really happening, cloud-native enterprises everywhere.
Yeah, and and for it, we see the role of Craig McLuckie and Joe Beda, two of the three founders of Kubernetes, being super critical to that.
Yeah.
And that's what they bring to the party. And I'll tell you, those guys are so excited about this transaction and how we're bringing these communities together, and we see them really, being a powerful force and being able to help to bridge those two worlds as we describe it.
Yeah, Craig has often described his excitement about the Spring community to me. It's very palpable.
Yeah.
So maybe another question then. Kubernetes is open source, Spring is open source. We're talking a lot about open source. People don't always associate VMware immediately with open source. You care to comment on that?
Really? Oh, man. We're working on it.
Yeah.
And, it's very interesting, that, fundamentally, as we'd say, the open source world is changing.
Yeah.
Right? And as these shifts are occurring, VMware is highly committed to, I'll say, change our profile in the open source community. And we've been taking steps to do that. That was part of the Heptio acquisition. Right? Craig and Joe, as we were meeting with them and I was meeting with them, they were almost more interested in what the deal terms, more interested in our commitment to open source than the deal terms of Heptio. Right? Are you guys really committed to this? Are you really going to standardize this, commit to the community contributions and that partnership? And the answer was yes, and that's part of what led them to believe VMware was the right place. It's also part of the Pivotal transaction, right? And part of the conversation, are we really committed to go be that leader in the open source community? And absolutely we are. And what we've seen is that, the Kubernetes, in open source, it isn't a question of what you say, it's what you do, or more specifically, what you contribute. right? And now VMware is the #2 contributor to Kubernetes overall, right? And we're increasing the overall bandwidth, commitment, engineering resources that go behind our commitment to open source and Kubernetes. And in the next couple of years, my objective would be is that VMware is seen, perceived, and realized as one of, if not the most enterprise-friendly open source company in the industry.
I think that's super exciting. If you
Does
just
that get you interested? Yeah? Yeah?
Like that?
Okay, yeah.
I think that's super exciting. If you just look at the assets between the creators of Kubernetes, the Spring community, everything you have in cloud-native open source right now, it's a big change. So since you brought it up, why Pivotal? What was the motivation for that? We talked a little bit around open source, but maybe you can walk us through that.
Yeah, a little bit full circle.
Totally for me, yes.
You know, welcome back to the future.
Ah, exciting.
Anyway, you know, and it really is in many ways, you know, we've been busy at VMware the last few years, and our networking thrust, SDDC, our cloud thrust. And, you know, frankly, you know, when we and EMC, now Dell, agreed to separate Pivotal and bring those assets together, I'd say, boy, we would not have been able to do what Pivotal has done over the last 5 or 6 years. We were busy. You guys were investing heavily, right? So to some degree, this was sort of an opportunity that we knew we couldn't materialize had we kept the Pivotal resources inside of VMware. So having that separation allowed it to grow and really flourish, but now we see this opportunity to bring these back together because now it's time to scale. You know, the Kubernetes transition in the industry is real. Pivotal has reached a velocity, a capacity, a critical mass, and a reputation in the industry. So this idea of coming full circle, right, as this Kubernetes transition, and as Pivotal has already laid that out, right, is super exciting to us, but also in the Spring community. We're just in awe of what you guys have done. You know, we don't have that developer DNA, that reach in that community, so we're thrilled about being able to leverage, expand, and accelerate that as well. And we've been working with you all, you know? We sort of like you folk, right? You know, right over here, and think products like VMware PKS, you know, have helped us sort of build that bridge that we can naturally accelerate as we now bring the companies together. And as you know, we're working quickly on that. We've committed that the transaction will be finished before the end of the year, and we're thrilled for what the opportunity that presents for this community, for the Pivotal team, but most importantly, for the mutual customers of our offerings.
Yeah, I think it's such an exciting moment for the industry, for cloud-native enterprise in general. Thank you so much for joining us, Pat. We couldn't be more excited.
Well, thank you all. Very good.
Thank you. That's a cool moment to see him making that commitment to open source cloud-native enterprise. If you want a symbol of how real this is getting in enterprise, I think no one better to listen to around that. I was trying to think of, you know, this full circle concept, and you know, a little bit about what's happening with Kubernetes in our platform. And for me, I have to go back to, this is 2011, the original 5 people that did Cloud Foundry and Wired magazine. And the thing that's funny is we didn't have all this great cloud-native technology then. Like, Spring Boot hadn't yet redefined how enterprises were going to build microservices. There was no such thing as a common Kubernetes scheduler. Envoy didn't exist to do layer 7 traffic routing. There wasn't really clouds, like Microsoft and Google were still on the sidelines. And VMware funded this initiative to go build a cloud-native application platform before anyone else did. And I think the legacy of that has had a remarkable impact in the industry. And I do think that there's a continued need to steward this best developer experience in cloud native at VMware that they rightfully own. And so I'm going to welcome up on stage next a really brilliant technologist and personal friend of mine, Cornelia Davis.
Thank you so much, James. So appreciate it. It is so great to be here on the first morning of SpringOne Platform and be able to be part of the group that is welcoming you here to Austin. As they say, when in Rome, right? Thank you so much for the opportunity to come out and talk about both cloud-native infrastructure, but really more the applications, because we've been talking about that for the last few minutes already. So we're going to go back to this slide, which is the overall Tanzu slide, but what we want to do is we want to drill in on that build box. And this is really where the platform lives. It's the platform that we know and love, our flagship PCF platform, but it's a platform that's expanding to do more than that. It's the pivotal platform. So when we talk about that pivotal platform, I really want to talk about three things. I want to talk about continuing to push the envelope in the platform that we have been curating for the last 6 years, 6, 7, 8 years. As Pat said, the ability to do that within the pivotal context, within the pivotal company, is really what enabled us to do these big things. So we're going to talk about continuing that to push that envelope in the application dial tone. Then we're also going to start to talk more and more about how Kubernetes comes into that. So without further ado, let's push forward and talk about that first one.
What I hear you saying, Cornelia, is we're going to review a little bit about how we're bringing CF to Kubernetes, and then also bringing some of the CF experiences and components to every Kubernetes.
Exactly right. Exactly right. You'll see it goes in both directions. Now, before I actually drill into the details of that, I want to talk first about how we keep pushing the capabilities that we are providing in the flagship product that many of you know and love and have gotten so much business value from. So Pivotal Application Service 2.7 is the next release. And I'm not going to go through all of these details, but what I want to point out to you is the first couple of things on this slide. We've been talking about getting developers to prod, right? So if you take a look at things like native rolling application deployments and the ability to go back, roll back to a previous deployment, putting all of that in the hands of the developer, not having to file a ticket to say, hey, I need to go back a couple of versions, having the developer be able to do that, that is something that we are bringing to the PCF platform.
And I think that's a good thing to reaffirm here. The continuous investment in the best developer experience for continuous delivery on containers is mission number one.
That's right. That's right. And one of the things that's really interesting is for those of you who maybe know Kubernetes a bit better, these are some of these ideas are actually seeded from what we were able to learn in this open source community that is Kubernetes. So the ability to keep track of a number of version deployments, those ideas really were keyed off of that.
Absolutely, absolutely.
So moving forward then, let's talk a little bit more about actually not just seeding the ideas from Kubernetes into the Pivotal platform, but actually bringing Kubernetes directly into the Pivotal platform. In particular, right here, what you see is what I remember years ago James saying is sacred. That is the CF push experience. I actually remember him walking around the floor on the fourth floor.
I would have a little card and say, CF push is sacred.
Yep.
Because
CF push is sacred.
Because
he
at
would
the
say,
time,
don't mess with my CF push.
Because at the time, it was an unproven idea. The idea that you would just take an artifact and arbitrarily hand it to a computer, and the computer would algorithmically derive its runtime environment, put it in a container, auto-wire it to load balancing, that was sort of crazy.
It was.
And so it was sacred to get that right, and we carry that forward today.
Yep, exactly. And so what we're continuing to hold that sacred. So we're still holding that sacred, James, which is this CF push experience. Now, as James said, we had to build our own container scheduler because Kubernetes and, quite frankly, Docker didn't even exist back then. So we created our own image format, all of those types of things. What we're able to do now is we are able to leverage things like container scheduling from Kubernetes. And that, however, we're maintaining the sacred CF push. Well, what does that buy us? Well, what that buys us is the ability to start to leverage all of the innovation that's happening around that Kubernetes container scheduler in the platform experience.
Yeah. And you know, just a quick customer story here. You think about the ubiquity of Kubernetes and how that's happening and what VMware is doing with this mission control single pane of glass. Some of our early customers have said, we can't wait to have a kubectl experience for our operators to integrate into their operational single pane of glass dashboards like mission control.
Yep, exactly. So that's the second thing that we're doing. Now, finally, talking about the third thing is that many of you are able to take advantage of quite a number of capabilities. It's along the lines of that auto wiring. It's, hey, here's CF push, and we do all of this magic behind the scenes for you. Well, why should that just be limited to the CF push experience? Can we start to bring some of those capabilities natively over onto the Kubernetes stack? And that's what we're starting to do as well, is bring those capabilities over to Kubernetes. So let me give you a couple of examples here. First, number one, the process of building code needs to be not only repeatable, repeatability is important, but it also needs to have some of those enterprise controls that you were alluding to earlier.
Security, frankly. Like, it's a huge problem to enable developers to continuously get to production if security is not auto-wired into the system.
Exactly. And so that's where the Pivotal Build Service and cloud-native build packs come in. So the cloud-native build packs is a new standard. And what you see on the far left of this screen is you see very clearly those layers that we've been talking about on the Cloud Foundry side for some time. So we've got the base operating system, we've got the runtime layer, and we've got the app layer. And build packs have for a long time allowed the platform team, who are responsible for security and compliance, to control the layers beneath, where the app team is just providing the layer on top. Well, the OCI standard, the new standards around the container format, actually have a first-class notion, a first-class understanding of those layers. So there's great things that are happening there as well. But what the build service adds to that is it says, OK, now with a clear understanding of those different layers, I'm going to watch for changes in any of those layers and go ahead and rebuild the container whenever I need to. And then we can take that all the way to deployment.
Excellent. Prod is our favorite place to be.
Exactly. It's all about enabling developers to get to prod more easily, more rapidly, to the point that you made about the DORA study.
Yeah, and I would just say customer feedback on this has been unbelievable. There's people that maybe didn't know Pivotal as well yet, but they'd adopted Kubernetes, and they had the intuitions around the build service immediately. I think this is going to be a ubiquitous technology.
Yep. All right, and let me show you one final example. And as you all know, those of you who are using Cloud Foundry today, it's all about app teams being self-sufficient. And going back to being able to release frequently, as in the DORA report, any time that you need to do something where you're not totally self-sufficient, that slows down deployments. So let me give you a very concrete example. Again, Kubernetes brings you this great substrate. Now, every time you're going to spin up a cluster, or any time you deploy a workload, you can wire things up so that load balancers are automatically created for you. But with the creation of a load balancer, you've also got to create a DNS record, right? How does that happen? Via ticket? Everything slows down. So what we're doing is we are bringing what we've learned about dynamic routing, and by dynamic routing, I mean, first of all, that this is a routing capability that is much more aware of the cloud-native patterns. The fact that containers only live for an average of 4 days, not 4 weeks or 4 months.
Yeah.
Right? So the IP addresses are constantly changing, so that dynamic routing capability has to be there. But the other element is that that capability needs to be tenant-aware, so that you can do something like give an app team the ability to control DNS naming in their own environment. So that's an important capability that we bring as well. And so this allows teams to work autonomously and based on some of the other things we talked about as well, securely.
I think that's fantastic. The customers we've engaged with, the excitement around the continued evolution of the holistic platform, and also meeting thousands of new customers who might be starting off with our components. It's a really exciting time.
Exactly. So really the story is this, is that everything that we've learned over the last 6 or 7 years, that we've learned in the app space, keeping CF push sacred, is we're bringing that over into the Kubernetes, but then we're also able to layer, basically take advantage of the things, as you pointed out, the 6 folks that were up on the slide have a much richer set of primitives on which they can build that higher level experience.
Absolutely, Cornelia. I think it's an exciting time. If you think about what we can build over the next 8 years compared to the last 8 years, starting with nothing, now we're starting with this incredible cloud-native ecosystem. It truly is an unbelievable time to be in this market.
It is. Great.
Thank you so much for your contributions.
Thank
It's
you.
great to have you up here. Thank you. She has been such a leader for our customers. When she speaks to our customers about what they should do next, the gravity in the room is palpable. And she had a book on her chest. That is her book, Cloud Native Patterns. You should all go out and check it out. She'd be happy to sign it for you. Yeah. Go, Cornelia. So I have a few minutes here to wrap up on a few comments I'm sharing at the start. And I'm going to talk a little bit about, now that we can get developers to production with Spring Boot, are we done? This one's a funny one. You're supposed to laugh at the neck-and-neck race for number one between Spring Boot and Spring MVC. Thank you. 1 out of 4,000. But I don't think we're done there. I think there's this other phenomenon that's happening. If you look at start.spring.io, there's 15 million projects a year starting there now. Friday night alone in my house on my laptop, I'm doing the math. That's approximately a project every 2 seconds is kicking off on start.spring.io. And I think what makes that more remarkable is how wired it is into this new open source design ecosystem. If you look through start.spring.io, you see the latest new trends. You see everything in cloud databases and open source databases. You see Kafka streaming. Some of these things we're going to talk about. And I think it's not just the success of Spring as a web framework, but also as this connective, integrating tissue to everything that's happening in an open source enterprise that's so exciting. And start.spring.io is the very center of that. So I think that gives us a responsibility. And the responsibility is to continue our march, to do more and more for enterprises in their architecture. We've had success of bringing microservices and a more decomposed architecture to the best enterprises in the world. But some of them today, if I'm honest, they look like this, which is that we've refactored some of the functions out of their monoliths. We've made them auto-scaling. We've enabled teams to unleash their human potential and deliver for clients. But there's a lot left to refactor. And a lot of that has to do with data and integration. I'm going to close briefly on some of the things that the Spring platform is doing in that space. The first one that I've talked about a lot is that we've learned through 500 app transformation engagements with clients that there is a pattern of tell, don't ask, of event-first design, of domain-driven business thinking that enables teams to truly cooperate and interoperate together. And one of the big open source things at the heart of that in enterprises today is Kafka. In the past, there were all these proprietary vendors that wanted to sell you their proprietary way of connecting things. And now Kafka has emerged this open community that enables developers to build both data pipelines and microservices. So we think big investments in Spring streaming and in bringing Kafka to the Pivotal platform is the right next move for us to start to take on data processing and data-driven microservices in a meaningful way with clients. As a point of news, we announced this week, Confluent just released a blog of their platform is now GA on our container service. So that's a very exciting piece of work. People excited about this? The other thing that's happened is that our app transformation team has started to take on Kafka-first redesigns of complex data problems. And one of my favorite things in my inbox right now is the results back from those early tests. And they say something in them. It's like, we turned all of this complex data architecture into just another boot application, and it's so much simpler. And boy, that gets me fired up. But there's other things in enterprises, to close on this, that are not just another boot application. The API gateway has been a stranglehold for some teams where they're trying to ship their microservice, but the API team has to go approve it. They can't continuously deliver changes to that. There's complex scripting that happens there. Some of the applications I see are surrounded by proprietary ESBs with proprietary packaged ETL, and while the developer can write their code, they can't really control enough of the environment around them that they need to. So we're applying our litmus test to API gateways, and Spring Gateway has become this emerging, exciting place of innovation for enterprises. This is another example where developers lead us. Developers started writing to us that, hey, we're using Spring Gateway as opposed to these packaged API products. And we're moving faster, and we're not having to ask for permission as often or with as much friction. And it could just be another microservice that gives us rate-limiting authorization, transformations, and filters. Why isn't that just more Java programming for us? And Spring Gateway is an exciting change in that space. And we're following on by making investments of turning it into more and more of an enterprise product. And we're saying, yeah, the gateway can just be another Spring Boot application. We will make it enterprise ready. We will integrate it with authorization. We will bring service discovery and API documentation to the product. So I think that's really exciting, and I encourage everyone to check out Spring Gateway. So we want to go from a world that looks like this today to this. Our bet, if there's one message in everything that we're saying today, our bet is on you. You are the most important people in an enterprise today, the people that can continuously deliver the applications, the people that can write that business-changing code and get it to production and learn. And we want the world to look more like the intuitive approach that you're already used to with Spring Boot for everything you need to do to get your job done in the enterprise. We have people like this. That's my bet. It's also a bet of another company that I'm going to welcome to the stage now, who's building their cloud. If you could pop the slide for me. A little company in Seattle called Microsoft called us and said, we'd like to make Spring Boot and Spring Cloud a first-class citizen on Azure. So I'd like to welcome to the stage Ryan Morgan, who leads our Spring team, to tell us more about that along with Microsoft.